Today's title is My Covenant of Peace, and our key verse is verse 10. Let's read verse 10 together, okay? For the mountains may depart, and the hills be removed, but my steadfast love shall not depart from you, and my covenant of peace shall not be removed, says the Lord, who has compassion on you. Well, today's opening question, probably ready for that, right? The opening question today is, would you like to have peace? Oh, okay. Most of us would say, yes, please. But what is peace? Partly, it means wars and conflicts ending. But peace is also a condition of mind and heart and soul. The Bible promises that the birth of Jesus brings peace. Yet, Jesus himself warned that in this world we will have tribulation, which means pressure, affliction, distress. In fact, in real life, it's easy to lose our inner peace. We get upset or stressed out or hurt or afraid, or we start feeling guilty about something. We can't sleep well and feel overwhelmed. We become like this even when outwardly we're doing all the right things. What so many of us need most is peace. So how does Jesus' coming give us peace? Today we're looking at Isaiah chapter 54. It's about God's covenant of peace that, he says, can never be removed. This prophecy was fulfilled through the coming of Jesus. What is this covenant of peace? And how can we experience it, even today? May God speak to us through his life-giving words. As we read today's chapter, Isaiah 54, we find that the whole chapter describes a woman. So today is kind of Ladies' Day. The whole chapter describes a woman. What kind of woman is she? First of all, in verse 1, she's barren and has never been in labor. On top of that, in verse 4, she has experienced the shame and disgrace of being a young widow. Verse 6 says, she's like a woman deserted and grieved in spirit. Like a young wife who's been cast off. In fact, in verses 8 and 9, God himself says he's been angry with her and he has rebuked her. In verse 11, God says she's afflicted, storm-tossed, and not comforted. In verse 15, people stir up strife with her. And in verse 17, they speak against her. What a nightmare this woman has been through. Who is God talking about here? He's speaking to his own people, whom he sent into Babylonian exile due to their sins against him. They have been through some of the most traumatic things imaginable. But today's passage is not just for people in extreme circumstances. The woman in this passage represents all those who suffer the consequences of sin in any way. To certain people, life can seem like a series of unfortunate events, a dark comedy of moral relativism. Of course, life is not always black and white. Bad things don't happen just because we did something wrong. But hardships do befall us if we have been rebelling against God. When we knowingly violate his moral standards. Sooner or later, we suffer. Maybe not outwardly, but definitely inwardly. We do our best to put on a good show, but shame, fear, guilt, condemnation, insecurity, and a sense of failure begin gnawing at our soul. No matter how clever we may be, we become restless, anxious. We have no peace. But notice how God speaks to the woman throughout this chapter. In verses 1 through 3, he tells her to sing. He tells her to enlarge the place of her tent, and that she's going to have so many offspring, they'll possess the nations and go into many desolate places. In verses 4 and 5, God promises she's going to forget all her shame and disgrace because he is her maker, her husband, her redeemer. In verses 6 through 8, he says he's disciplined her only for a moment, and then reassures her that he has called her and will have compassion on her. In verses 9 and 10, God swears to her his steadfast love and eternal covenant of peace. In verses 11 and 12, he promises her an eternal dwelling place of beautiful, precious jewels. In verses 13 and 14, God promises to teach her children and give them great peace, and to establish her in righteousness and protect her from all fear. In verses 15 through 17, God even promises to protect this woman from all who stir up strife with her and speak against her. God's promises to the woman in this chapter seem too good to be true. They were partially fulfilled when God brought his people out of exile. But the promises in today's Bible passage are fulfilled most fully in Jesus. As Apostle Paul interpreted Isaiah 54:1, by faith in God's promise, we are all members of the new covenant in Jesus, God's true children living in freedom. In our sin, we were barren and spiritually desolate. But God, by his grace, he makes us fruitful and spiritually influential. He even gives us the vision to spread out our spiritual offspring all over the world. Do you have that vision? My spiritual offspring will spread all over the world. Wow. God promises us that in Jesus. Based on verse 5, it's Jesus who's our true husband, our bridegroom who makes us fruitful, our Redeemer who gave himself to redeem us from all lawlessness and to purify us to belong to him. So I'm going to do something unusual at this moment. I'd like all the ladies to read verse 5. All the ladies, please, let's read verse 5 together. Okay, let's go. For your Maker is your husband. The Lord of hosts is his name, and the Holy One of Israel is your Redeemer. The God of all the earth he is called. Okay, I think you need to read that again with conviction. Okay, ladies, let's go. Amen. So did you know you've got the best husband? Amen. Jesus is the expression of God's everlasting love for us, which God talks about in verse 8. Jesus establishes us in righteousness, which God talks about in verse 14. Why? Because Jesus himself became our righteousness and sanctification and redemption. I don't have any righteousness, but Jesus is my righteousness. He promises us real security, not in some house, but in the beautiful heavenly city, the New Jerusalem. Until we get there, the Bible says Jesus is our advocate with the Father. He gives us the wisdom that none of our adversaries can withstand or contradict. Today's chapter climaxes in verse 10. So let's read it together again, okay? For the mountains may depart and the hills be removed, but my steadfast love shall not depart from you, and my covenant of peace shall not be removed, says the Lord who has compassion on you. This covenant of peace is at the essence of what it means to have a real relationship with God. In this context, it's as though God is renewing his marriage vows with his people. And it's like the everlasting covenant God made after the flood in Noah's day. God says here in verse 10 that his covenant of peace is more permanent than even the mountains and the hills. Later, God urges us in the book of Isaiah, incline your ear and come to me. Hear that your soul may live. And I will make with you an everlasting covenant, my steadfast, sure love for David. Once again, God mentions his steadfast love toward sinful, unworthy people. This is what makes his covenant with us possible. His steadfast love. Honestly, we fail over and over again. But God's love for us is steadfast, unfailing. Usually we think of a covenant as a kind of contract between two parties. But Isaiah adds something unusual about this covenant of peace. In the first servant song, you may remember, we studied the servant songs in the summer. In the first servant song, God tells his servant, I will give you as a covenant for the people, a light for the nations. And he repeats it in the second song, I will keep you and will give you as a covenant to the people. Isaiah is telling us, the servant of the Lord himself, he becomes the covenant of peace. Earlier, Isaiah wrote, for to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government shall be upon his shoulder, and his name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his government and of peace, there shall be no end. It's a prophecy of the birth of Jesus, our true King, our Prince of Peace. One day, he's going to spread his peace among all the nations. Isaiah tells us that when we receive Jesus as our King, he will pour out his Spirit upon us from on high, and he brings us his righteousness, which will produce in us peace and quietness and trust forever. The key to God's covenant of peace is what Jesus, the servant of the Lord, did for us. Isaiah writes, "But he was pierced for our transgressions. He was crushed for our iniquities. Upon him was the chastisement that brought us peace. And with his wounds we are healed." Jesus brought us peace through his death on the cross. His covenant of peace costs us nothing. But it was so costly to God. Apostle Paul tells us, "For he himself is our peace, who has made us both one, and has broken down in his flesh the dividing wall of hostility, that he might create in himself one new man in place of the two, so making peace, and might reconcile us both to God in one body through the cross, thereby killing the hostility. And he came and preached peace to those who were far off, and peace to those who were near. For through him we both have access in one Spirit to the Father." So Jesus himself, who gave his own body on the cross to bring us to God, he is our peace. He is able to reconcile us, no matter who we are, what we've done. He's able to reconcile us to the holy God. It's the best news ever. He helps us abide in this peace through the Holy Spirit. Jesus is also able to reconcile us to one another, no matter what kind of hostility we might have between us. At Christmas time, we should ask, what's my relationship with God actually like? And what kind of relationships do I really have with people? Jesus can be our peace. How can we experience his peace? Well, it's not just about saying the sinner's prayer, or keeping some religious rituals, or ticking off a checklist of seemingly spiritual activities. The Bible tells us it's very simple how to experience this peace. If we receive God's grace by faith in Jesus, the Bible says we have peace with God. And then each day, if we choose to set our mind on the Spirit, the Bible tells us we have life and peace. As we learn to walk by the Spirit and be led by the Spirit, we keep growing in the fruit of the Spirit: love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. We need to remember that Jesus came to give us such a beautiful life of inner peace. By coming to his cross daily and asking him for his Spirit, Jesus renews God's peace in our soul. I think sometimes we're just up in our head, only thinking. We need to come to Jesus, to his cross, and ask him for the Spirit. And he'll give us God's peace in our soul right now. Isaiah goes on to say one more thing about this covenant of peace. I think it's very important to many of us here. Let's read verse 13. Okay? All your children will be taught by the Lord. Great shall be the peace of your children. One of the most beautiful promises in the Bible. All your children will be taught by the Lord, and great shall be the peace of your children. These words might be the deepest comfort to any parent. Honestly, one of our greatest anxieties is what might happen to our children, or those of us old enough, to our grandchildren. But instead of worrying, we need to stay close to Jesus in this covenant of peace that only he gives. He's the one who can teach our descendants. And when he does, he says he gives them this same great peace. This is his promise not only for physical children, but also for spiritual children. We need to give our children and Bible students the influence of God's peace in us. And depend on God himself to teach them to come to Jesus. How does God's peace in Jesus impact our lives? It doesn't mean that, I've got peace, now I can just sit down and do nothing. The end of the book of Hebrews blesses us with some powerful words. I'd like us to read them. Let's read these two verses, Hebrews 13, 20 and 21. They're on the screen. Okay, let's go. Now may the God of peace, who brought again from the dead our Lord Jesus, the great shepherd of the sheep, by the blood of the eternal covenant, equip you with everything good, that you may do his will, working in us that which is pleasing in his sight, through Jesus Christ, to whom be glory forever and ever. Amen. Our Lord Jesus, our great shepherd, came to this world and shed his blood to give us an eternal covenant with the God of peace. What great news this is! This is what Christmas is about. Jesus, our great shepherd, shed his blood to give us an eternal covenant with the God of peace. When he does this, this verse says, he equips us with everything good to do his will, and he works in us what is pleasing in his sight. In other words, with his peace in our souls, we don't just go to sleep. We work hard for his glory in all that we do every day. What a beautiful life. Inner peace, working hard for the glory of God. It's well known that the times we live in are sorely lacking peace. Just drive around a little bit on the highway or on the streets. Road rage is real. Like, what is everyone so angry about? We're just driving down the road. Wow. There are many theories as to why so many people have no peace. Some say it's due to media information overload. Maybe. Put down the cell phone, right? It doesn't give you peace. Some say it's because people have so many broken relationships, so many hidden grudges, Some say it's because people have such low self-esteem and so many destructive bad habits. All of this may be true to some degree, but the root problem seems to be people are cut off from God, our Maker. Even many who profess faith in Christ are not really close to Him in their practical lives. We can't find peace in our feelings. We can't find peace in people, or traditions, or material things, or entertainment, or music, or pleasure, or drugs and alcohol. None of it gives peace. We can find peace only in Jesus. He Himself is God's covenant of peace with us. He alone can heal our afflicted, storm-tossed souls if we would just come to Him. So let's be honest and come to Him for His healing. This Christmas, may God help us deeply experience His covenant of peace with us in Jesus. May He help us in this beautiful peace to serve Him wholeheartedly in the new year according to His will and for His glory. Let's pray.